morning and welcome to a very special live broadcast of Animal Tracks. I'm Sean.
And I'm Allison, and we invite you throughout the broadcast today to call us if you have questions about any of the animals you're seeing. You can call us in Jackson County at 776-6767, or if you're outside Jackson County, call us toll-free at 1-800-558-1993. Now, we have many exciting animals for you to see today, and to our right is Dave Sidden. He is the director of a special place called Wildlife Images in Grants Pass. And Dave, before we look at some of the animals we have today, why don't you tell us a little bit about Wildlife Images?
Okay. Well, Wildlife Images is a real large wildlife rehabilitation and education center based near Grants Pass. We treat as many as 2,500 animals in a single year. The animals arrive when they've been injured out in the wild. They may have been shot or hit by cars or poisoned or caught in traps, whatever. They're brought into us. We repair their damage whenever we can and then re-release them back out into the wild. In some cases it involves training the animals to go out in the wild again, and some animals are permanently disabled, not able to go out in the wild, and they are animals we utilize for our educational programs, like this.
So most of the animals that you have, you are able to release?
Yeah, the great majority of the animals we get in are rehabilitatable and releasable out into the wild again, but there are a number of animals that either have a real long rehabilitation process, like our bear cubs. They'll be in for about 2 years before they're able to go out in the wild, and others can be patched up and released almost immediately.
So all the birds that we're going to be seeing today can't be released, right?
Yeah, the birds that we'll be working with here in the studio are permanently disabled. For example, Gizmo, the little western screech owl here, has a badly damaged wing, and the break was real close to a major joint in the wing. Quite often when the break is that close to a joint, when you do set the bone, the calcification will extend up into the joint and freeze that joint, so he can no longer extend the wing or retract it in order to fly.
So he can't fly.
So this guy is permanently disabled because of a physical injury. Now we have other birds that are permanently disabled because of mental disability. So you just think people are wonderful, and we call those birds imprinted. And of course that's certainly not going to help them survive in the wild if they like people.
Because they just walk right up to somebody and...
Unfortunately,
Hey,
a lot of
buddy.
people aren't really that friendly towards
Right.
birds and will shoot them or injure them somehow.
Now, I think sometimes the kids will think that Wildlife Images or places will go out and collect animals, but that's not true. You don't ever go out to collect animals.
No, the last thing we need is more animals brought in just for fun. We have plenty of animals to take care of now. So the animals come into us from state or federal agencies quite often, or individuals that find the animal injured somewhere and, of course, get involved and bring them out to us.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about this guy. What was his name? Gizmo?
Gizmo. He's a western screech owl, and these little screech owls come into us more often than any other bird of prey simply because of their propensity to hunt along highways. They often will find an area where mice or small crickets or whatever cannot escape from them, and an area like a highway or a road surface is perfect. There's no deviations from the surface for the animal to hide in, so they'll see the mouse out there, they'll focus in on it, they'll dive in after the mouse and not realize a car is approaching at 60 miles an hour. They're oblivious to anything coming like that, and next thing they know, they're stuck in the grill of a Buick going down the highway. And we've literally had automobiles come into the facility with these little owls impaled on the grill of the car, and we've had to peel them out. These owls are actually crepuscular. Most people think of an owl as a nocturnal bird, but typically they are actually crepuscular. When you see which means twilight active, and if you see his bright yellow eyes, that's an indicative characteristic of a crepuscular owl. So he hunts during the twilight hours, just when the sun is setting or at dawn or when the sun is coming up again, when there is some twilight for him to utilize. So the owls that have a dark colored eyes are typically the really truly nocturnal owls.
Oh, the ones that hunt at night have the darker eyes than the ones that hunt at twilight.
Exactly right.
Now you have some couple of wings out here that show some adaptations of owls. You want to tell us about those?
Yeah, owls, one of their unique characteristics is that they are able to fly without making any noise whatsoever, so they don't startle their prey on approach. And now one of the adaptations is really apparent on the leading edge. This is a screech owl wing from one of those animals stuck in a grill somewhere. And as you can see, they're serrated on the front edge of these leading feathers.
Fine points.
Yeah, they look like a comb. And what that does is it makes the transition between high pressure air underneath the wing and low pressure air on the top of the wing a very gradual transition, so the wings don't make any sound when they fly.
So when they're flapping, it's pretty silent. It's
exactly. Now if you were to see a hawk wing, the same scale and size, you'll notice the leading edge of that hawk wing has a very sharp edge, sort of like a knife edge. So the transition between the low pressure and high pressure air is really a very sharp, sudden transition, and it does make some wind noise when they do flap their wings. So the hawks don't need the silent flight like an owl.
Okay. Well, what is it that makes a bird of prey a bird of prey? Why don't we've used that term bird of prey or raptor? And what is it that, what are we talking about when we say birds of prey?
Well, a bird of prey is typically a bird that kills and uses their feet or talons for doing so, because there are other birds that kill for a living, like ravens and jays and all these animals. But a bird of prey uniquely uses their talons for grasping their prey. And the term raptor is derivative of that term, because raptor means to seize or to grab. And the talons, as you can see on this barn owl's foot, preserved specimen there, they have those long curved talons for hooking under the skin of the prey to subdue the prey, and they usually will use their crushing force of the talons to sever major organs in the animal, whatever they're attacking, or hold them still so they can make the kill with the beak.
They're really sharp.
They are real sharp.
I wouldn't want to be grabbed by them.
No, it's really a real painful experience when it happens.
Now,
Even
so
this
he's
little
not
guy,
sharp enough to do too much damage to you, but you would.
well, you can see some of his talons, I don't know if you see real easily, but they are actually under my skin just slightly.
Oh, well,
and whenever they're nervous or they're not comfortable with their area where they are, they'll tend to hold on real tight. Hold on, Gizmo. Nothing's going to get you. So that felt good getting his talons off from under my skin anyway. So even these little guys have really a tenacious grip for the size of the bird. Some of the bigger birds, as we'll explain later, have a grip that's rivaled by no other animal of their size.
So you're going to wear gloves with those other birds?
Absolutely.
Well, I noticed that you have another bird here. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, while we're bringing this bird in, we want to remind you that if you have questions about any of the animals you're seeing or general questions about animals here in the Pacific Northwest, give us a call at 776-6767, or you can call toll-free at 1-800-558-1993. So you want me to hold him? Or?
Do you want to hold him?
Sure.
Yeah, if he jumps off your hand, just hold your hand steady. He'll stay right there. So
now I get to get the embedded talons.
Absolutely. The one that Corey's holding right now is called an American kestrel. And the American kestrel for years was called the sparrowhawk, but the name has been changed because of two things. Number one, they do not primarily feed on sparrows. They rarely feed on other birds or sparrows. And they're not a hawk. It is a falcon. And as a falcon, they have certain unique characteristics, like the black stripe underneath the eye. Looks like their makeup ran down their face. They have large, dark eyes. They have a second hook on their beak that's called a toenail tooth that's for killing their prey. They have a cone in their beak that's designed for slowing the air down because they dive at real high speeds. So that's another adaptation. The falcons also have really long pointed wings and long slender toes. These are the fastest animals on Earth. The kestrel's biggest cousin, the peregrine falcon, which stands like about that tall, has been clocked in pursuit of their prey at over 185 miles an hour reliably. So at that tremendous speed, of course, they can't reach out and grab their prey when they go by, or they pull their legs off. So what they do is they make a fist out of their feet, and they just simply punch their prey out as they go by.
Really? Knock him out?
Yeah, and as you can imagine, you know, an analogy that we use for the children is, imagine if your mom's driving down the road at 185 miles an hour and you put your fist out and you hit one of your buddies when you go by. Certainly going to put your lights out in a hurry. So that's the sort of strategy these guys use, and it works really well. And now he'd punch out mice, grasshoppers, small animals like that. But the little kestrels are real adaptable, nest in hollow portions of dead trees, and can be found all throughout this area.
Yeah, beautiful bird.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of the few falcons or few birds in North America where you can tell male from the female simply by the coloration. Most birds of prey, like in the screech owl, male and female are identically colored. These little guys, the male has a bluish gray on the leading edge of the wing, and the female is sort of a brick colored all over her whole body.
Yeah, the males are prettier.
They're brighter colored.
Now, is that true with all birds of prey, or is it just few?
Most birds of prey, there is no color dimorphism between male and female. There's about 4 or 5 in North America that do have color difference between male and female.
Yeah.
The kestrel is one of these.
Dimorphism is a term that biologists use. Di means two,
Right.
and morph means body form or body type. So when you say an animal is sexually dimorphic, that means depending upon the sex of the animal, it will have one of two forms. But as he said, most of the birds of prey are not sexually dimorphic. So, great,
Good.
beautiful.
Great.
What do we want to go? Do we have a question? We're going to go to Steve and Pam over who are answering our phones. Do we have a question, Steve?
Yeah, we have a question from John at Hoover School, and he wants to know if any birds of prey dive underwater to get their food.
There are some that really do dive, like the osprey and the bald eagle, for example. The osprey has been known to dive 2 or 3 feet underwater to catch their prey. And they have a very unique joint on the distal or the end of their wing that allows that part of the wing to lay flat to the water and lift their body out from underneath the water. And no other raptors have that unique adaptation.
Oh, so they sort of go straight in and then put their wings out? And
yeah, they take their wings and hold them straight up, and then the wing tips can flap independently of the entire wing and lift them back out of the water. So the ospreys are probably the best adapted for catching fish in the water of any raptor there is.
Okay, do we have another?
One more question. How many birds of prey are endangered?
How many birds of prey are endangered? Of course, worldwide, there's several hundred that are endangered. In our particular area, there's probably 3 or 4, and endangered status is actually sort of a regional status because there are bald eagles that are seriously endangered in Florida, where in areas like Alaska, they're not really that endangered. Locally, probably the most famous is the spotted owl because of habitat loss. And most of the birds of prey in our area that are endangered are exactly due to that habitat loss. They have very strict habitat needs, and as the habitat diminishes, the birds diminish along with them.
That's
okay.
wonderful. Well, I noticed that you have another bird here. And this is just a gorgeous, a little bit bigger than the first one you have. Can you tell us a little bit about this bird here?
Now, this is an owl with our barn owl, and the barn owls are probably the most unique developed of all the owls. They have the best hearing of any animal ever studied on Earth today. The barn owl, they were often referred to as nature's Valentine because of that heart shape to their face. That heart-shaped face actually is an adaptation to enhance their hearing ability. Like the little screech owl we talked about earlier, they can fly silently, and if you look around the eyes, that dish shape collects the sound, channels it into their ears, so when they're on the wing, they're listening for their prey moving. And they've been subjected to studies in a room with no available light whatsoever, a mouse released in that room, and they have a 97% success rate on catching the mouse first strike by just listening to it walk across the floor. So they can't see it at all, just listening for it.
So that shape of their eyes is like a antenna almost, like a radio dish antenna where they collect those sounds.
And their ears, to enhance that, are asymmetrical or not the same. So the right ear, for example, would be facing high and forward, and the left ear faces low and back. So then the differential of when the sound hits the left ear to the right ear will tell them how far an animal is away. A Doppler effect, like when a train comes by you, you hear that sound change when it goes by you. That's how they work to locate their prey, just using their hearing.
Because since their ears are located in different places, they can tell where the animal is by the way the sound hits their
Exactly. There'll be a slight difference in the way the sound hits the forward-facing ear as the back-facing ear, and they can use that sound differential to tell how far the animal is away.
Now, we're talking about ears on this animal, and I'm looking at the barn owl, and I'm noticing there is not the feathers sticking up that we would call
like this guy,
like we looked at it at this owl.
And actually, these aren't even ears; those are just feathers.
Ears, right.
They're just feathers. But I've heard the term eared owl before, and is that referring just to those feathers?
It is. Now, these feather tufts, like on the screech owl here, they can lay them down or stand them up. I don't know if Gizmo's going to let me do it, but they're just feather tufts, and they are used to help break up their silhouette for camouflage. When they're, of course, in the middle of the day, they're trying to look like a bump on a log, and they look more like a bump on a log if there's some crags and deformities. So they stand those ear tufts up. Some people believe it's a way for them to silently communicate between other owls. You know, they can see each other, and maybe standing the ears up mean, hey, I'm your buddy, or maybe I'm an enemy or something like that. So great horned owls, screech owls, and the eared owls do have these tufts.
You can sort of see them.
Yeah, you can see them stand up
there. But they're not their ears at all.
No, the ears are located behind this facial ruff, and you see better on Goldie, the barn owl here. Hey, Goldie, look this way. And right behind the edge of that facial ruff is a flap of skin, actually, sort of like ours. It sits under the feathers, and that's right behind that edge. She's not going to let me touch that out right now.
She's a little nervous in the studio here. So.
And the barn owls have also probably the very best mousetrap in the world. A study in Florida showed that they, over 96 nights, one pair of barn owls brought to their young 758 mice and rats in 96 nights. So they're amazing.
So if you have a problem with mice in your barn,
Absolutely.
Now, don't they have barn owl boxes that you can set up even if
They
you
put up
want
in
to
the
attract
eaves. Yeah.
barn owls to your yard and to your barn to get rid of the mouse problem?
And if you're lucky enough to have a barn owl, you can tell quite often by finding pellets like what you have over there
Oh,
too.
right.
Those-
Yeah, we'll talk about those in just a second. Let's check with Steve and, oh, hey, Gizmo's give me a present on my hand
Oh,
here.
there you go. That's
Nice to keep your hands on.
Gizmo?
Yeah, Steve,
My
do
hand
we
was
have
really cold.
any
Oops,
more
I'm
questions?
sorry.
Yeah, we have a couple calling questions. Michael from Little Butte just called in and wants to know what kind of fish typically do osprey catch?
Osprey are pretty opportunistic, like most hawks or most fish-eating birds. They catch what's available. Typically, they have to be selective about size. They don't want to get something so big it's going to drag them underwater. And there have been stories verified that actually they'll sometimes catch a fish so big, and when they get excited after the kill, they can't unlock their talons, and it will drag them under, and they've been drowned that way. Bald eagles as well.
Oh,
So
yeah,
typically, it's
gosh.
probably in this area, whatever fish are close to the surface and available. So primarily trout. There may be things where bluegill and crappie and things like that in the slower moving bodies of water. So they're real opportunistic. Any type of fish that's available in the right size, they'll go after.
Not just a specific kind that they're after.
They can't afford to be that choosy.
Right.
You know, they'll starve to death if they are.
Okay, another question?
Another question from Garrett at Hoover in Medford, and his question is, do larger birds of prey eat smaller birds of prey?
Oh, good
Quite
question.
often they will. Birds of prey are instinctively territorial and tenaciously territorial. So if a great horned owl were to find this little guy in the wild, he would look upon it as an hors d'oeuvre more than it would be another one of my cousins.
Hey,
She
buddy,
isn't
hey,
neat to
pal.
have around. So a great horned owl would take him out in a heartbeat. And that's been part of what's led to the demise of the spotted owls as our way that we've harvested timber in the past. We've created island habitats, the spotted owl's in the middle of this little island of habitat, and when you clear cut around it, you make great habitat for its arch enemy, the great horned owl. They move in around it. Whenever the whenever the spotted owl ranges out of its territory, they're grabbed by the great horned owl and eaten. So something that we've learned over the years now.
So we've made it better.
So what is the largest owl here that we find in the Pacific Northwest?
Pacific Northwest, the largest in height is the great gray owl, and they're
gray
bigger
owl.
than our great horned owl that'll be coming in next.
Yeah, that's-
But they will not weigh as much as the great horned owl. The great horned owl is actually a member of a family of owls called eagle owls, so they're the most robust, the toughest of the owls. And the great horned
Can you
owl
hear?
here is the largest common owl. The great gray owl is slightly taller, but our great horned owl here would outweigh the great gray owl.
All right, tell us a little bit about this hooing fellow here.
Well, the great horned owl is, of the owls in North America, probably the most tenacious. It's the only bird of prey that we know of that will kill and eat skunks night after night. So either they really have a real poor memory or they're really not too bright. You hear that adage, the wise old owl. It's really not that true. The owls, if you look at their brain in proportion, their brain is actually smaller than each of the eyes are. So the eyes are so big and so well
Kind of
developed.
like Sean.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, the great horned owls have no need for a really huge brain. I mean, they don't have to learn algebra or trigonometry or do any of the things that we need to do as far as complex behavior. They need to know how to reproduce, how to protect their young, how to do a few things in the wild. So a big brain is heavy and would diminish its flight efficiency. So these guys have a brain that's just perfect for their size.
This particular
Why are
owl was
you-
imprinted, so he was taken when he was a baby and raised by somebody, and then we got him later. So because he's imprinted, he relates to people, and it would be dangerous for him to go back to the wild.
Because the people who raised him were not people really who should have been.
Well, yeah, it's
Raising
really against
wild
the law. You
animals
should
'cause
take
it's
one
illegal.
immediately to. He was actually found in a cemetery by the cemetery keeper
Oh, wow.
as a baby. Yeah.
Well, now that hooing and that cawing, is he signaling to somebody,
I think
to another bird?
it's territorial, and it's also to signal each other. And the male has a lower hoot. This is a male, and the female has a higher hoot. But it's really for communication and territorial to keep out.
They do it to some degree for courtship. It's coming close to the great horned owl's courtship time when they set up the nest. They're one of the earliest nesting birds that we have in our particular area. So right about now, we're starting to think, golly, it'd be nice to start finding a nice place to
baby,
build a nest.
baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, eat a couple screech owls and have a good time.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Gizmo.
Yeah.
Just put
So
it-
he's hoping a nice female will swoop down here,
Absolutely.
join him. This is Corey, who is also a volunteer at Wildlife Images. And Corey, I'm going to give you Gizmo here.
He's not digging in just a little bit, eh?
Oh, it's
All right, it's starting to cool off.
where's
One of the things too I've noticed on these two birds, these two owls here, they have almost a different beak shape, and is that normal, or
Their beak shapes typically on every owl will be certain unique characteristics, or every bird of prey actually. The particular beak on this great horned owl is a little overgrown right now, so it'd look more like the screech owl's beak. We have to trim their beaks. In captivity, they have protein content much higher than they would in the wild. In the wild, they're maybe going to eat maybe once out of 4 days, 1 day out of 4. In captivity, of course, they get fed every day, and protein content is real consistent, so their beaks and talons grow much faster, so we have to trim them on a regular basis.
Now, I know I've been hearing some phone calls, so I was wondering if, Steve, do we have some more questions here?
Sure we do. We've got Christian from Phoenix Elementary School, and he wants to know, do barn owls or screech owls fly faster?
Neither one of them are real speed demons. Owls really don't have to go anywhere real fast. I would say they're probably real comparative in flight speed. Barn owl, on the average, would probably be slower. A screech owl, as you notice, has little short stubby wings and a little pudgy body, so they have to beat the wings faster to keep in the air. So if I were to guess which one on the average is faster in the air, it's probably the screech owl, just by its body form and the way he's structured. The barn owls can fly like a butterfly. They'll just have this real nice floaty light flight. And sometimes you'll hear a barn owl, they'll make this really awful screeching sound. And what they're doing with that is trying to startle their prey. Their prey will be startled and jump, give away their position. And then the barn owl can come in and find them that way.
Not trying to get rid of hiccups or anything.
No.
Now you mentioned owl pellets earlier, and we have some here. We can get a close-up shot of these. Why don't you tell us what these are, and while you're talking about it, I'll kind of break one apart here.
Okay, you need better hobbies. These owl pellets are basically the regurgitated material that an owl is not able to digest. So it consists of hair, bones, fur, all the parts of an animal that's packed in. So part of the bird's efficiency is not carry around a lot of weight you're not going to utilize. In the case of non-digestible material, they have an area where they can separate digestible material, send that into the digestive tract, and the non-digestibles they'll compact like a little trash compactor, the hair and bones, and then they'll regurgitate that or throw it up and leave that on the forest floor. So when you find these little pellets, you can often find a perfectly preserved animal in there. It may be a shrew, it may be a mouse, it may be a rat, but you can dissect them, and many kids in some of the classrooms now can reassemble the animals from these pellets. It's a real interesting thing to look into.
This looks like the skull of a rodent
some
or
kind
a
of
mouse,
a rodent
I
here.
bet it is.
It's covered up. So I know that scientists can use owl pellets not only to find out where owls are living by collecting the pellets, but then they can find out what kind of food those owls are eating. Because this owl obviously had eaten it. See there? I don't know if you can see this. There's little teeth right there on the bottom of this is the top part of the mouse skull. And then here's the 2 front teeth.
Yep, looks like a mole or something with the front teeth like that.
I've also heard that they can, looking at owl pellets, can actually determine the species of the rodent, of the mouse that they find in the area, so they can actually determine that there are certain types of rodents in different areas, which is kind of interesting. It's a real great way to do sort of a population study.
That's a femur, it looks like, one of the main leg bones.
It looks like a little thigh bone, a little leg bone that's in here, so you can tell a lot of stuff, a lot of neat stuff about the last meal that owl pellet ate before it hacked this thing up.
Well, Steve, Pam, how are we doing over there with questions? It sounds like the phone's been ringing.
We've got about 4 or 5 questions lined up here, so let me give you a couple of them right now. Kevin and Bernie from Phoenix Elementary School and Elisa from Little Butte all want to know what's the largest bird of prey and what's the largest owl specifically?
The largest owl, probably let's start with that, is probably Eurasian eagle owl, where our great horned owl weighs in at about 3 to 4 pounds. Eurasian eagle owls can go up to about 7 or 8 pounds.
Whoa.
So they're the size of our golden
Almost
eagles.
twice the size of that thing.
Yeah, they're really, really large.
Yeah.
And the largest of the eagles, or largest of all birds of prey, is either the harpy eagle in South America or in the Philippines. There's a Philippine monkey-eating eagle also that are huge. Where our golden eagles weigh in at 7 to 8 pounds, maybe as much as 10, they commonly will be 22 to 23 pounds a female. So they're massive, just huge talons, and really they're designed for killing big animals like sloths, monkeys, animals they'll find. in the forest of the rainforest, the canopy, where our eagles typically catch jackrabbits and cottontail rabbits. The wingspan's no bigger than ours, than our golden eagles, because they're forest dwellers. They have to have short, broad wings to start maneuvering through the rainforest like they do.
But they're just much heavier and stronger.
Yeah, much taller, massive birds. Really incredible.
Is the golden eagle, the golden eagle is the largest bird of prey that we have in North America?
It's the largest North American bird of prey as far as wingspan and body length. The bald eagle on the average is a little heavier. The golden eagle is a little longer. So it's hard to say which one's bigger. You have to figure out in weight or size.
Okay.
But they wouldn't be able to take things as large as sheep or cows.
Well, actually, the golden eagles in the days of Genghis Khan and the emperors and czars in Russia were trained to hunt wolves, and they would attack and kill wolves. And that particular part of Russia, Genghis Khan's army would go into battle with over 1,000 eagles, and the eagles weren't used for attacking soldiers. They'd be used for feeding the soldiers. They'd go out and hunt rabbits or whatever and bring all the game back to feed the soldiers. So the golden eagles for thousands of years have been used as a hunting tool, and they're incredibly powerful if they're trained well. The eagles that would hunt wolves would attack from above and hit the wolf and crush its skull with their talons. So they are incredibly powerful.
I knew people used falcons and hawks to hunt with, but I didn't know they used eagles.
An eagle's much tougher because they're so heavy and they're a lot tougher to train, and if they do get a hold of you, they're going to do a lot of damage as well.
Okay.
All right, Steve, you want to give us another question?
Yeah, Ashley from Little Butte wants to know, how far can an owl turn his head? She's noticed that this one can swivel his head around.
Good idea. An owl, the best way to explain it is if you were to take an owl and have him look straight ahead, they can turn their head 270 degrees in either direction. So it'd be essentially like me turning my head to the right and looking all the way over my left shoulder at you. So they can do this because they have more cervical vertebrae or bones between their skull and their back than mammals do. A mammal typically has 7. A bird of prey has between 11 and 13. And they have to do this because their eyes are so big and so well developed they can no longer turn their eyes in their sockets.
They're sort of stuck looking straight ahead.
So to make up for that loss of flexibility, they have more cervical vertebrae that allow them that more flexible spinal column in that area.
So if there are any of you out there who can turn your head as far as now, you can rent yourself out to a circus or something like that.
Or movies.
Right. But they can't go woo 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 and spin it around like you see on the cartoons and stuff like that. No, but
they whip it around so fast, sometimes people have the feeling, hey, he's turning his head all the way around, but not the case.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Want to bring another?
Yeah, we have another animal here. Very large.
And this owl is a wonderful bird, and they're much maligned because of the controversy surrounding them. It's a northern spotted owl.
Oh.
And these are the guys that are sort of like the miner's canary. You know, they tell you when something's going on, and the decline of the spotted owl has told us that something's going on in the forests. We're losing precious habitat that these guys, for some reason, cannot adapt to other types of forests. They cannot live in second growth forests. They have to have the mature stands of old growth forests. And a lot of it is believed because they have a very hard time thermoregulating or controlling their body temperature. So on a real hot day, these guys move up to the higher branches where the clouds are blowing through these branches and cool them off. So without that ability, they may become hypothermic and die because of overheating or underheating in some regards too. So these particular birds have real unique adaptations, and also they feed on the animals that will live on the branches of the tree. And so they don't have abilities to adapt to other habitat. Also, you might notice he has dark eyes.
Yeah, I was going to say, remember what we said last time. If you look, if he'll look at the camera, we'll see what happens. There you go. You can see those dark eyes. Well, he'd rather look behind him. You can see those dark eyes, and you remember Dave said earlier that the owls, like the great horned owl that have the yellow eyes, hunt at, anybody remember? Twilight.
Dusk. And that's called? Crepuscular.
I didn't get it either. No problem. And the ones that have the dark eyes are the ones that are truly nocturnal, and that's a word that a lot of people know that means hunting at night. That's a beautiful owl.
Another unique structure on owls too is their feet. They have what's called a zygodactyl foot design, where an owl or a hawk would have 3 talons in front and 1 talon in back. That's the main killing talon. An owl, typically when they're in hunting fashion, has talons that are all opposing one another. It's hard to tell on preserved specimens because quite often when they preserve the feet, these toes can be moved around. But normally this toe is back here so that all the talons oppose one another. So when they get a grip on something, no matter which way their prey pulls, it digs a talon in deeper. So they really have a good grip when they get onto things.
So it's sort of like a parrot. I know a parrot has zygodactyl feet where 2 are in front and 2 are in back, and they use those not really for killing, but for holding things and gripping.
Woodpeckers and flickers that climb up the bark of trees have to have that foot design as well.
All right.
So anyway, that's a northern spotted owl.
Northern spotted owl. Beautiful.
Aren't they gorgeous
Beautiful
animals?
animal,
Beautiful.
yes. Steve, Pam, we've been hearing the phone ring over there. Do we
Yeah,
have some more questions?
We got lots of business over here.
Okay.
Actually, these are related. Christina at Hoover wants to know how many eggs does a bird of prey hatch each year? And Billy at Little Butte wants to know, he's heard that a bald eagle can lay more eggs if there's one missing from the nest. So maybe you could address those two questions.
How many eggs does a bird of prey lay every year? It really depends on the species of bird of prey. Every species is unique, and it also depends on how much game is available, how long the breeding season is. Some birds of prey will actually nest twice a year if there's abundance of game, the weather's good and all that. Typically, like a golden eagle, will have 2 eggs at any given year. Sometimes only one of the youngsters will be raised because the eggs are laid maybe a week apart. The older one hatches first, and it'll become dominant over the smaller of the birds, and actually will kill them. It's kind of called the Cain and Abel syndrome in the nest. So the bigger one then gets all the food and can be raised up. Some of the birds, like a barn owl, they may have a clutch as many as 8 or 10 young in the nest.
A lot more.
So there's really a great range in how many young or how big the clutch is in each of the birds' type. And the other question was
if you take an egg out of the nest, does it make it lay more?
Quite often,
eggs?
that's a strategy in captivity they use for getting the birds to lay more eggs. Is you pull one egg out of the nest and they will lay another, recycle and lay another egg. So quite often when we're trying to breed like the condors in captivity, that's one strategy, is let them lay an egg, pull that egg out, then you get them into the reproductive cycle and they'll replace that egg quite often.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah. Steve, do you have any more?
Yeah, sure we do. Sarah from Griffin Creek Elementary wants to know, how do owls change when they're in captivity?
You mean their behavior, you think?
I think so.
Behaviorally, most owls seem to adapt fairly well to captivity, depending on how they're handled. There's some species that never do adapt real well. But owls in general seem to do pretty well in captivity. There's some species of hawks, on the other hand, like the accipiters or the pursuit hawks, goshawks, Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, really high-strung little guys, and they have a really bad time in captivity. It's like, you know, a nervous little chihuahua, but this thing can fly, and they'll run into obstacles, you know, barriers of any sort. So if you have them in an enclosure, they'll fly into it and crash and break their feathers and everything. So they don't adapt very well to captivity. So you have to design your handling techniques and your facilities according to what type of bird you're having.
Great. Well, we better bring in another,
yeah, we have this next
another bird here.
Bring this bird in.
Ready to come.
This is one of our new favorites. It's Augie, and Augie is named because it's an auger buzzard. Now, this is basically the African counterpart to our red-tailed hawks. And the auger buzzard is a member of a family of hawks like red-tailed hawks that we'll see later that's called the buteos. And buteo is Latin for broad wing. And these are the soaring hawks. So oftentimes when they're out there looking for their prey, they'll open the wings, soar on the thermals, or hot air rising off of a landmass, and they'll circle for hours watching for their prey. When they see their prey, they go into a dive or a stoop, and they grasp the prey with those talons. So these guys, the red-tailed hawk, our North American cousin to the auger buzzard here, are the most common birds that we get with gunshot wounds, simply because they're such an easy target. They're circling in long, lazy circles, and somebody comes out and blasts them.
People do still shoot them on purpose?
Unfortunately, and well, a lot of it is because of folklore. For years, the red-tailed hawk was called the chicken hawk. And people always equated a chicken hawk with, hey, my chicken's missing, I'm going to go out and shoot this bird. So that was a tragic misnomer. If a hawk had grabbed the chicken, he wouldn't be out soaring. He'd be off somewhere eating it. Typically, it was somebody's dog, or maybe something else that went in and grabbed the chicken, was out there in the brush eating it, and the farmer grabs a shotgun, comes out, and blames the first most obvious predator, and it's almost always the red-tailed hawk or a buteo, member of that family. Now, the auger buzzard here was bred and raised in captivity for our educational programs. Now, with birds of prey, we have to have quite a barrage of permits to have these birds. You cannot have them as a pet. We do have to have state permits, federal permits, a USDA permit, many permits to have these animals and conduct our educational activities. Well, in some venues, we're forbidden to use some of the North American birds of prey in certain areas. So some of the birds that we'll use, like from Africa, do not jump under those same permits. So it gives us a little more latitude to conduct educational activities in other venues.
Right.
Teach people a little about it.
I keep hearing the phone ringing, so there must be some more questions.
They're on the phone.
They're on the phone right now. So
Okay,
Steve,
we got a couple of questions here. Theo and, let's see, Ashley from Griffin Creek wants to know why owls hoot and not sing.
Owls hoot probably for, it's hard to say why they don't sing. A bird that sings is trying to attract other birds to himself. Typically it's a courtship thing. You know, I'm going to sing and have a pretty song and other meadowlarks or whatever are going to come in and find me. A great horned owl is real rarely, or any owl is rarely trying to attract animals, especially during the daytime. So the hoot's probably a low tone that carries further in there are certain forest areas, whatever, and it's just basically a tone that most animals are probably oblivious to. It's white noise to most animals, but other great horned owls will appreciate that song. So they're really not trying to compete for, I've got a prettier song. It's just like, hey, I'm an owl and I'm over here, you know, come over here if you want to come over and nest with me, you know.
Yeah, or maybe could it be a territorial thing too?
To some degree. They don't have the range of songs as other birds either. It's typically what you hear is what it is all the time. So that sound is probably universal for I am ready to breed, or this is my territory, or I'm angry, or gee, I'm, you know, whatever's going on.
Having a nice day.
Well, it sounds like we've got a lot of questions, so let's try and see if we can get through some of these questions. They've been wonderful so far. So, Steve?
Yeah, Brittany from Little Butte and Carly from Griffin Creek both have the same question, and they want to know how many years does a bird of prey typically live?
Oh, good question.
Oh, good. Yeah, that is. Birds of prey are fairly long-lived. Basically, a good rule of thumb, the bigger the bird, the longer the lifespan. Not always true, but in most cases it is. Like the little screech owl, probably 6-7 years, about as long as they'll live. A golden eagle, in fact, the record in captivity is one that lives 68 years.
68 years.
And there's records of a bald eagle occupying the same nest site for 97 consecutive years. Now that's not one bird occupying that same nest that entire 97 years, but maybe a pair will establish that nest territory. One will die, the one remaining will take another mate, and then the older of those two will die, and so they'll be in the same nest site for years and years and years sometimes. But 68 years is the longest we know of for a bird of prey, and that was a golden or bald eagle. I can't remember which one.
Now, didn't y'all had a golden eagle? Wasn't it a golden eagle at Wildlife Images that lived quite a long time?
Oh, we still have several that are well into their 30s right now.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they live a long, long time.
Okay.
Almost as long as a parrot.
Well, let's go ahead and take a couple more questions and then bring out another
They're both
animal.
on the phone right now.
Oh, are they both on
Yeah.
the phone right? Well, Steve is off.
Oh, okay.
Cindy from McLaughlin and Theo from Griffin Creek want to know what's the smallest owl in the world?
The smallest owl in the world, I believe, is the elf owl, found in the deserts of the Southwest, and they're just little bitty guys. They're really neat. They're about this big. They often nest in the saguaro cactuses, a hollow part in the cactus that's been made by a flicker or another bird, and they'll go in there and nest in these little cactus. And they hunt huge animals like crickets and grasshoppers and things like that. So they're probably the smallest of the owls in the world.
Now, do we have a saw-whet owl?
We have a
around
saw-whet
here?
owl. We have a
What about
pygmy owl also, but the
Yeah.
elf owl's still smaller than both of
There's a
ours.
saw-whet, and those are about the size of a robin, maybe, or
Right.
something like that. So nothing near as big as the spotted owl we've seen or the great horned owl. Well,
Okay.
let's bring
Yeah,
in
let's
another
bring in
animal that we can learn a little bit about here. Oh, this is a beautiful
Now, we
bird.
were speaking about red-tailed hawks earlier. This is a red-tailed hawk, an aberrant color strain of a red-tailed hawk, and this is called the Kreider's red-tailed hawk. This
Beautiful,
really
that
white
white,
coloration.
yeah.
You'll only see this in maybe 1 in 10,000 red-tailed hawks. And this particular bird was found on a sidewalk here in Medford. It had flown into one of these mirrored buildings and received a concussion, crashed into the mirror, found on the sidewalk. We rehabilitated the bird, took it out of the area, probably 120 miles away from here, released it, thought it was fine. 3 weeks later, it was found crashed in the same building again. So at that point, we realized this bird's really not quite cut out to go out in the wild again.
Because they're not normally from around here.
No, typically east of the Cascade Range is where you'd more likely find a Kreider's redtail, but they are extremely rare even that area. And the other bird you're looking at with Brian over here is a standard red-tailed hawk. That's the normal coloration we'd see in this particular area. And they can be identified typically by, if you can turn him around, Brian, maybe towards the camera, you'll notice he has the reddish-brown color to the tail. So that's where they get that name red-tailed hawk. When they're youngsters and just first hatch and go out on their own. You know, they fledge the first year. They don't have the red tail. It's sort of a barred brown color. When they go through their first major molt or drop out their main flight feathers and grow in their first new adult feathers, that's when they get their red tail. And that signifies that they're ready for breeding and courtship. So before that time. Also, if you can see on that left wing, it's a really interesting thing, or the right wing, I'm sorry, Brian. There's a blood feather coming in. You might notice that feather, it looks like the inside of an ink pen shaft in there. And that's basically when the feathers are growing, there's a nerve and a blood supply to that feather. So when they're growing, if you break the feather, it hurts. It's like bending your fingernails backwards. They'll bleed and it will break that nerve. So we have to be very, very careful with these birds when they have these blood feathers growing in.
Oh, wow.
They can actually bleed to death if those feathers are broken.
If those feathers are broken. Yeah, these are just absolutely beautiful animals.
Now, red-tailed hawks, it's pretty common to be able to see them around here, isn't it? Can you give people who are watching an idea of where to look if they want to look for some different birds of prey?
When you're traveling and you're going up or down I-5, along I-5 is a migratory pathway for red-tailed hawks. So birds that are moving from this area down south or moving up from south coming back north. That's where they migrate along the Willamette Valley there. And these guys can be seen on the fence posts or on the light posts or on the trees. And quite often between Portland and Grants Pass or Medford down here, I can see 70 or 80 in any given trip that'll be along that area. And they're resting and they're waiting for something to run out in these long fields and areas along the I-5 makes really good hunting grounds. So quite often you'll see those guys along there. But again, they're the soaring hawks. So when you see a hawk out soaring, it's almost always a red-tailed hawk in this area.
Now, I know we've been down to California on trips to look at animals before, and down on the little fence post on your way down to California, you see a lot of those little American kestrels.
Absolutely.
Little bluish birds that we saw earlier. You can see them sitting there waiting for a mouse to...
And you'll commonly see them performing a behavior called kiting, where they're standing stationary in the air and just their wingtips are fluttering, and that's a kestrel. When you see a bird doing that, that's usually a kestrel watching for their prey.
Now, yeah, we have some more questions, I think, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, Dustin from Little Butte and Evan from Conger Elementary School in Klamath Falls both want to know what's the heaviest weight that an owl can pick up and carry back for food, and typically how much does a barn owl eat? So this relates to eating.
Okay. Barn owl will, in the wild, they'll eat to the point of satiation. Basically, they'll eat everything they can possibly hold, and then they'll fly off, and maybe it'll be 2 or 3 days before they catch something again. So it's hard to say how much they'll eat in poundage or whatever. A barn owl that weighs 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, could probably eat about 1/4 of its own body weight at any given sitting if they have to. And how much can they fly off with? A rule of thumb with most birds of prey is they can fly off with about 1/3 of their own body weight. So the rumors you hear about eagles carrying children off and all that sort of thing, cattle and Volkswagens really aren't true. They can lift about 1/4 of their own body weight, but there are exceptions. I've seen a pygmy owl catch a rufous-sided towhee, which is a bird about their same size and weight, catch it, kill it, and actually fly off gaining altitude with it. So in extreme cases, these little guys can really lift a lot of weight.
And a lot of times, I know I've seen for barn owls, they swallow everything whole. Right?
Absolutely.
I've seen them take a mouse and just go.
Yeah, they don't have teeth. They can't tear things apart very easily.
Can't use a knife and a fork.
Yeah, so they'll basically swallow it whole, and then of course that pellet will be compacted with the non-digestible materials.
Little mouse kebab. Well, Steve, I think we've got some more questions.
Yeah, actually we have Oscar from Phoenix Elementary and Wes from Little Butte Elementary, and they both want to know, without carrying food, how far can a bird of prey typically fly?
Boy, that's one of those hard questions to quantitate, because how far can they fly depends so much on conditions. Wind, thermal activity, the physical condition of the bird, a lot of things. So it's a real huge window of variability in there. Typically in migration time, birds of prey will maybe cover 200 or 300 miles in a day. So I'd say it's a good average. So they'll fly like that, and again, they may not eat for 2 or 3 days at a time. So they can go 200 or 300 miles a day, 2 or 3 days, so 600 miles or so, something like that, maybe.
Okay. And actually, some of our birds of prey will go all the way down to South and Central America to migrate.
Our ospreys, for example, and the turkey vultures migrate out of here and often are ended up in Baja, California, someplace like that. So they go a long way.
Yeah, great.
typically think of the songbirds as migrating.
Right.
Yes, Steve, do we have some more questions?
Yeah, Mike from Hoover wants to know, is it illegal to shoot a bird of prey?
It is. All North American birds are protected by law. There's a few exceptions to that. I think it's the starling and maybe one other bird that is not protected by law, but all other migratory birds in North America are protected by both federal and state laws, and especially birds of prey. There's a fine of up to $5,000 for shooting any of these birds of prey.
So definitely
Yes.
good question.
Yeah, these are great questions.
Let's bring our next beautiful bird in here.
And this is a Harris's hawk, and they're a bird that's really unique to the deserts of the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico. In fact, their range extends as far south as Argentina. We saw them in Argentina when we were there
Yes, we did.
last year. And these birds are the only bird of prey that we know of that is gregarious, or they like a group, like a pack of wolves, or social. And so it's not uncommon to see 8 or 10 of these guys in a group working together. Now, 2 or 3 of the group that are in the deserts will get down and maybe walk through the sagebrush trying to scare out the jackrabbits, while a couple of members of the group are soaring overhead. When the rabbit runs out of cover, Harris hawks will swoop down, grab that rabbit as a group. They'll make the kill. They'll even divide the food up and feed each other's young in the other bird's nest. We don't know of any other bird of prey that behaves that way.
Yeah, that's
So it's like a pack of wolves hunting or a pride of lions hunting together, group hunting behavior.
It's really amazing. They're one of the brightest of the birds of prey. It's also, they have been seen performing another behavior that's really unique called stacking, where down in the deserts there's not an abundance of perching sites. You know, maybe it'll be a big saguaro cactus for every 10 miles. So maybe one of the Harris hawks will land on the top of the cactus. The next member of the group wants to stay nearby, so they'll land on that one's back, then another one on that one's back, and they've been seen stacked 5 high, standing there waiting for animals to run by they can go after.
So like a hawk totem pole.
It is indeed.
What happens when the one on the bottom wants to fly?
Right.
I suppose the rest of them go with it, but the poor guy on the bottom standing on all the needles too with everybody else's weight. So they are pretty uniquely adapted and very tolerant of one another to perform in that way.
Probably fight over who has to be on the bottom there. No, it's your turn, Fred.
Yeah,
no,
I won't do that.
Well, Steve, I think we got some more questions here.
Okay. This is from Lone Pine. There's a whole 3rd grade class, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of their questions. But Taylor, Danny, and Lane all want to know, how did owls get their name? Where did the word owl come from?
Most birds of prey, most birds, it's a derivative of a Latin term of one way or another. I don't know Latin, so I don't know the roots of the term owl or the name owl, to tell you the truth. So I wish I did know.
Probably if you look it up in the dictionary, sometimes it'll say an L for Latin or a G for Greek, and it might tell you in parentheses what that word means. Good question.
That is a good question.
So,
all right.
What's another question?
Another question.
Mackenzie from Griffin Creek wants to know, how long does an owl stay with their young?
Usually the owls stay with their young until their young are able to feed themselves. Now, a bird of prey, from the time they are laid as an egg to the time they're ready to go out on their own, it's a real short cycle. In many cases, it's probably only about 3 months, 4 months. So the eggs hatch very quickly because birds of prey are all altricial. And altricial means they depend on their parent for all their food, their warmth, their protection. A precocial bird is the other type of bird, and that's like chickens.
Like a chicken.
Yeah, they get out from the time they hatch and they can take care of themselves. So birds of prey being altricial, they hatch really early. The eggs are fairly immature when they hatch, and the parent have to care for the youngsters. So from the time they hatch to the time they're out on their own, it's probably about 3 months. And after they fledge or know how to hunt, can take care of themselves, parents usually won't see them again. They'll take off on their own and disperse.
And they grow pretty fast, don't they? I've seen little owls in the nest.
You can almost watch them grow. And of course, with birds of prey, part of their survival technique is the parents, when the young are big enough to go out on their own, parents will drive them out of the area. It's like, go out and get a job, don't be taking out all my food. And so they have to do that to protect their territory and be able to breed for the next season.
All right, wonderful questions. Let's keep them coming. Steve, do you have some more?
Yeah, we got a couple more. Well, maybe you bring the next one in. Mrs. Harmon's class at Riverside Elementary in Klamath Falls wants to know, how many kinds of birds of prey are there in the world, just a rough number, and then how many different kinds of birds of prey are in Southern Oregon region?
Boy, those are both tough. I don't really know the numbers of exact birds of prey. There are thousands of birds of prey worldwide, and they're found on virtually every continent with the exception of Antarctica. Antarctica, there's a counterpart to a bird of prey that's called a skua that's sort of like an adaptation between a gull and a hawk. We saw them when we were in Antarctica, and real tough birds, but they really aren't a true bird of prey. So how many species of birds of prey or specific individuals, I'm really not sure. In North America, there's probably in the neighborhood of 200 or 300 different birds of prey in North America. Well, probably not quite 200 or 300, probably over 100 anyway, birds of prey in North America.
And what about it here in Southern Oregon?
Southern Oregon, we probably have about 30 or 40 species probably in Southern Oregon.
You can get a field guide if you can find a bird of prey field guide or just a bird field guide and kind of look up and look at the range maps, and you can count for yourself. So we want to make sure we get this beautiful bird in here.
This is one of the most impressive birds that we work with, and one of my favorites. It's a golden eagle. And the golden eagle is the largest and most powerful bird of prey in North America today. And this is a very small specimen. This is the smallest eagle we have at our facility right now.
That's a small specimen.
That's a small specimen.
It's bigger than some children I know.
Does it feel small, Al?
In a very short while, within about 5 minutes, your arm feels like it's going to fall off. He's probably right in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 pounds right now. This is Sundance. And he's a bird that's about in his late teens right now, early 20s. The golden eagle, as I mentioned, is the most powerful bird of prey in North America, and the strength is measured in the talons. His gripping strength is absolutely incredible. In fact, right now, if you were to get upset or angered with Al and wanted to clamp down, he can generate enough force to break his arm through that glove. Wow. And that glove's 8 layers of leather. Their talon strength is roughly equivalent to the strength of a leopard's jaw. They can apply 750 pounds of pressure per square inch with their talons.
So you don't want to make them mad.
No, and that's where they get the ability to bring down something as large as a wolf. You hit from behind and you take that talon strength and drive those talons through the skull. You're going to do a lot of damage in a real short time. They are, like the buteos, they're a soaring bird, so they have long, broad wings with a low aspect ratio wing. So a lot of drag, but a lot of surface area for lift.
Wow.
And these birds can soar for hours at a time.
Oh my gosh.
Aren't they
Well,
gorgeous?
you can really see how they can focus in on something with those eyes that they have, and they have kind of a little ridge over their eyes, don't they?
Well, that helps shade the eyes, so when they're flying into the sun, they can still see very well. And their visual acuity of most birds of prey is measured to be 8 to 10 times the visual acuity of a human. An analogy that we could use to describe that is to say this golden eagle can be perched on the roof of an 18-story building. We can walk out to the base of that building, set a ladybug on the sidewalk below. This eagle could not only see the ladybug, he could clearly identify every one of its legs and both of the antenna from 18 stories overhead.
From 18 stories?
Now,
we're going to try that experiment with Sean after the program.
And you have to keep in mind also the ladybug's no bigger in his field of vision. It doesn't magnify objects or make them look closer. He just sees the details at that distance. So it's incredible.
Incredible.
So they can be flying overhead and very, very easily see a mouse running.
Oh, absolutely. They can be
way down
several thousand feet up and easily see a field mouse going across a field. They have eyes that are very in tune to small motions, too. So when they see something moving, their eye picks it up really quickly.
You can see him looking there.
Yeah, he is
let's Steve, give us a couple more questions here, because
Chelsea from Griffin Creek wants to know, is it illegal to have a feather from a bird of prey except for an eagle?
It is illegal to have a feather from any bird of prey, including an eagle. You have to have a permit, federal permit, to have a feather like this. And the reason these laws were enacted is to keep people from going out shooting the birds and then collecting the feathers as a keepsake or a curiosity. If, say, a state trooper pulls you over and you have a feather in there, they want to know, well, where'd you get the feather? If you don't have a permit, that means that you may have shot the bird, you may have done something to damage the bird to get the feathers. And it also keeps people from selling and bartering with the feathers, which would diminish the protection of the birds of prey. So all feathers are protected by law that way.
So even if they're walking along and they find one just on the forest floor, it's illegal for them to pick it up and take it?
You'd have to get a hold of the State Fish and Wildlife or Federal Fish and Wildlife and apply for a permit to have that feather.
Yeah, the only reason that we can have these things that we have here on the table is because Wildlife Images has the permits to keep those. Good.
Would an agency really pursue a young child that would have a feather just maybe in his house? Or?
It's really, each case is going to be unique and different. It depends on who's investigating the case and what the behavior is of the individuals, and so many variables. It's really hard to say, but I would always say that they are protected by law. And, in worst case scenario, you could be fined pretty heavily for having the feathers. And there's no reason in the world not to apply for a permit. If you've got a feather for a legitimate reason, education, something like that, quite often they will issue a permit for those feathers. So please do follow the law.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left, so what's another question, Steve?
Robin from Griffin Creek wants to know if there's any birds of prey that can't fly, that are flightless.
I don't know of any flightless birds of prey. I can't think of a one. You know, there's very few flightless birds. There's a few cormorants, there's ostriches, rheas, cassowaries, things like that, but I don't know of any birds of prey that are flightless. Now, there's almost always an exception to the law. We have several birds of prey at images that are flightless because they're missing a wing.
They've been injured.
But no birds of prey that I know of that have adapted to be flightless. Prehistoric birds were. There were some moas and things, or I don't think the moas, but there are some birds that prehistorically bigger than ostriches that were without flight, but they were big enough to actually run down deer and grab them.
Wow.
They've been wiped out.
Because otherwise, with the kind of food that birds of prey have to catch and kill, it wouldn't work very well to not be able to fly.
And migration gets real hard on your feet, too.
I would imagine.
So, okay,
All right,
we got another.
Steve, some more
Brian
questions?
from Hoover wants to know, what are the feathers made of?
Keratin, the same material that your fingernails are made out of. That's what a feather is essentially made out of, just modified keratin. So it's a substance that mammals, birds alike seem to grow pretty well, and birds have just really uniquely designed or adapted to these feathers. And we can take a lot of the birds and look at them and trace their reptile ancestry that you probably already know about, because the feathers are made in very distinct patterns or lines down the body. If you get a bird wet, separate the feathers, they're all in very distinct track, like scales on a lizard. So a lot of theories are that there are simply lizards that over millions and millions of years had the scales have modified and become feathers.
It's kind of the same material. All right, Steve.
Good
another?
question, yeah. That's
Yeah,
a good
Amy
question.
from Griffin Creek wants to know, what kinds of diseases can owls get?
Owls are susceptible to quite a few diseases. Most of them are specifically avian diseases, very few of which we could have. There's a thing called avian tuberculosis. It's very serious. Owls can get that. They
And
get some-
avian means bird.
yeah,
right?
bird tuberculosis, but it is specific. It is something that could be passed on to humans, so you have to be careful with that. There's avian pox. There's a lot of other different types of ailments that are unique to birds, and we have to know how to diagnose and treat all these things when we get them at Wildlife Images.
Okay. All right,
All right,
Steve, maybe
Steve.
we've got time for a couple more questions.
Okay?
Okay, Janine from Griffin Creek wants to know, does the spotted owl ever change color?
No, the spotted owl, from the best of my knowledge, is pretty much the same color from the time they hatch through its entire life, other than maybe gets bleached out slightly by the sun, because feathers do, over a long period of time, get bleached out by the sun.
And you don't find different color variations of spotted owls like we did on that red-tailed hawk?
Well, there are variations, but not as
But not-
extreme. And there'll be probably albinistic ones occasionally, but
Like an
it's a
albino
real
one.
rare
Oh.
form.
Wow.
Now, albinistic means they're completely white.
Right, missing the
No
melanin or the
pigment,
dark
right.
pigment in their skin,
Okay.
feathers.
Okay.
Maybe
Interesting.
one more question,
Yeah.
I think?
Mrs. Rogers' third grade class from Fairview Elementary in Klamath Falls has a couple of questions, but they want to know how old do owls get, and how long for the eggs to hatch?
How long do owls live? 30s, into their 30s for the larger owls, probably. Considerably shorter based on how big the owls are. And what was the second question? I'm sorry?
How long till the eggs hatch?
Oh, how
Yeah,
long do the
how
eggs
long?
hatch? Incubation cycle is fairly short. It's 30, 36 days for most of the eggs, because again, being altricial, the eggs hatch very early on.
So the baby can learn what it needs to learn?
Well, basically, the precocial young, their egg incubation cycle is much longer, because the egg hatches, the bird's ready to take care of itself.
Right.
Being altricial or parent dependent, the eggs hatch much earlier, because the little guys have to be warmed by the parents and fed by the parents and nurtured by the parents. So the youngsters, the eggs are smaller, so the adult can carry around more eggs, and it's not as much as rain to take care of. So.
Well, we really, really appreciate having Brian and Corey and Al and Dave sitting here from Wildlife Images, and all these beautiful birds that you've brought with you today. We've had a great
It's been wonderful.
time.
Yes.
And
it's been
thanks to those of you that called in. We're sorry if we didn't get to everybody's question, but we'll
Yes.
try to do some more. Maybe should we
I know,
try
it's-
one more?
Well,
more little
I
question?
don't know, I was pretty impressed with a lot of the questions that were asked. And if you would like to know more information about owls and hawks and predatory birds in this area, I would recommend you trying to get a hold of a field guide or some books on the various species that
You
are
can
around
find some
here.
information on the internet also.
Yes, a lot of good internet sites on
And-
birds of prey.
And another thing you might want to do is make a trip to Wildlife Images
Absolutely.
sometime. Y'all give tours, don't you?
Yeah, they can call Wildlife Images out there and schedule a tour. We have appointments for scheduled tours, so if you want to call Wildlife Images and schedule a tour, we welcome you to do that. You can see many of these birds you've seen right here firsthand.
Now, do they have to be on specific days that they come for?
Our tours are going on right now during the winter time, all but Mondays. So the rest of the year, it's going on 7 days a week.
Okay. Well, thank you for tuning in to this special live broadcast with Animal Tracks, and we hope to see you next time. And thanks again for giving us a call.